trying to read my fortune in the bottom of my coffee cup. But it seems like I never finish. It's always half full, or is it half empty? Maybe it's my own superstition or a kind of self-protection. If it all ends bad, why would I want to look ahead? Oh, 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 still sitting here, just watching the sun go down, 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 down. Life goes on with or without you. It's up to you what you're gonna do. You could go on, you could stay. Who cares anyway? Life goes on with or without you. Tell me, baby, what you gonna do? You could go on, you could stay. Well, who cares anyway? Every conversation gets me high, and motivation gets me craving every unfamiliar situation. Reach the unreachable, achieve the unbelievable in the midst of all the madness. Remember, life's beautiful. Still I'm feeling restless, thinking I should rest less, work more, play hard, ready for the encore. Is this the kind of life I really want to live for? In my heart I know less is more, more, more. Life goes on with or without you. It's up to you what you gonna do. You could go on, you could stay. Who cares anyway? Life goes on with or without you. Tell me, baby, what you gonna do? You could go on, you could stay. Well, who cares anyway? Starting to think it's out of my hands. Is it all gonna be worth it in the end? Cause it's safe here in my comfort zone. Never stray too far from home. Then again, this way I'll never know. Maybe I should go. Go crazy, go insane, go for everything. Get the money, dollar bills in your wallet, stick a chain. Sign the daily, make a milli, sound familiar. The urgency is sounding the really for the family. And then they really talking freely, acting shit. They got me feeling like an Achilles, silly. I mean, really though. Really though. Feel the vibration of higher ground. Love always leads to the highest sound. Many conversations, people making speculations. That's some my procrastination due to my revelations. And then they get fugazi. You call yourself a rider. You need to speed your loyalty up like Bugatti. Baby, don't underestimate my underdog mentality. We about to race ahead, ambition on Ferrari. Life goes on with or without you. It's up to you what you gonna do. You could go on, you could stay. Who cares anyway? Life goes on with or without you. Tell me, baby, what you gonna do? You could go on, you could stay. Well, who cares anyway? Well, who cares anyway? You could go, you could stay. You could go, you could stay. Da-da-da-da-da.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Off Limits Show. Hi. Well, usually tonight we're doing the Gay XYZ show, but we're not doing it tonight because Jason couldn't be here, so we are doing the show. I think we decided to do it next week. So since we're not doing a Gay XYZ show tonight, we're doing Off Limits. So, or I am, rather. So if you want to call in during the show live, you can always call using Skype by Skyping Off Limits Show for free, which I just opened. So anyway, feel free to call if you want to talk to me during the show. So tonight I'm talking about, first of all, that song was by Fergie, whom I like a lot. And I played her song on our show on Gay XYZ last week. And so I thought I'd play it this week on this show, a different song, which is called Life Goes On. That's my favorite song from her album, by the way. One of my favorites. I love a lot of the songs on the album, but that's one of my favorites. I unfortunately relate a lot to that song and the message of it. But I wanted to talk about, generally speaking, why people kind of stay stuck in a rut when they don't have to during whether it's a relationship or life in general or whatever. And also the fact that no matter what you go through, life does go on, and you can stay, you can go, whatever. But you have to make the choice. You have to make an active choice and decision in your life to make a difference, in my opinion. So, and it's easy for me to give advice, and sometimes I take my own advice, and sometimes I don't. But it's only because I know what I'm saying, I know whereof I speak, but I don't always do what I should be doing. Do as I say, not as I preach, or whatever they say. Or do as I preach, not as I say. Or do as I preach, not as I do, or whatever the fucking saying is. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so it is October 19th, 2017, and it's here in Dallas, Texas, and it's cool here tonight, and it's been in the 60s most of the time at this time of night, and it's been great, and I love it, and glad the weather's finally starting to change, because I don't know how many of you live in Dallas or in the area or in Texas or from Texas or been here or whatever, but it just sucks when it gets hot in the summer. Fortunately, this year we didn't have a lot of horrible weather, but this summer, it's been pretty mild for us. But there are summers where we've had like 110, 112 degree weather days, or, the heat index. And then, this summer it's been mostly like the high 90s, which has been pretty cool for here. But there's humidity that sucks. But anyway, so moving on. I haven't done an off-limit show in a long time. I always say that every show. I know that because I haven't. But I may be a little out of practice of talking to myself instead of having to talk to someone else. So forgive me. Anywho, tonight I'm talking about Life Goes On. So let's talk about that first. So when, I know in my life, having written my memoir, which I'm not completely done with yet, obviously, it seems like the more I write, the more I have to write. But anyway, having written most of my memoir, I should say, thus far, it's definitely been enlightening. And when you look back on your own life and you see your kind of the patterns in your own life and what you've done and what you haven't done and things you should have done or said or didn't do and didn't say, whatever the case may be, you really begin to have a different perspective on who you are and why you are the way you are, and begin to realize the mistakes you made and try not to repeat them. And I know that when I was in my youth, in my 20s or whatever, my teen years, my early teens, after I started dating when I was like 15, guys, that is, of course, and, all the way through I'd say about 24 years old, 23, 24, I was pretty I was just love starved and hungry for finding, a relationship and finding somebody who was going to love me back and blah, blah, blah. And really wanted to be married and, have kids and all that stuff. I really, really wanted all that stuff. And, I ended up being in a couple long-term relationships, and then, some ended poorly and some I'm still friends with, and others, I'm still married. So, it's been, it was really challenging in those years for me, though, because I was so desperate for love and so desperate to find it that I was just like, anyone pretty much show me attention or whatever, I would overlook their flaws or overlook the things that I knew weren't right or weren't a right fit or whatever, because I so desperately wanted it to work in certain situations. And, I'm not like that anymore, obviously, and I can't be at the moment because I'm married, but I'm just saying, even before I was married, I had gotten up to a point where I no longer needed someone else's approval to be fulfilled. And, I don't know, I guess it was around the age of 30, maybe, or somewhere around there, 32, something like that. I just got to the point where other people's approval was completely and utterly unimportant to me. And I think that's a place that everyone should get to. I think it's a place everybody should get to, because ultimately, and I've said this many times on this show and on Gay XYZ and in my book and other things that I'm writing, and blogs and things, that it is completely ridiculous to concern yourself with the opinions of others. There's that saying, the lion doesn't concern himself with the opinion of sheep. And I've always been someone who really believes in that and feels the same way. Because I've never really, especially since I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I never really gave a fuck what people thought. And to an extent, of course, people I love and care about, of course, I care what they think. But people who I don't know and people I could care less about, no. So I guess my point is that having been trying to find love and everything when I was younger, it didn't really work very well for me because I was so, I was lacking in my own self-worth, and I was lacking in my own identity. I didn't really know who I was until later. And a lot of people say, I've known people who are like, they know exactly who they are from the time they're born. They want this, they want that. This is who they want to be, blah, blah, blah. And that's what they fulfill in their lives, and they're happy. But I think those are definitely the anomalies. I think most of us go through life kind of just stumbling through life, trying to figure out what the fuck we want, who we are, who we really are, not who other people tell us we are. And I certainly had that problem when I was a young kid because my entire family, both sides, were telling me who I was supposed to be. And the things that they were telling me I was supposed to be did not really jive with who I felt like I was. And I don't just mean the gay thing. I mean just, business or, being a lawyer, a doctor, or being this way or that way or acting this way or that way. And I just got to the point where, especially in my teen years, I started getting, of course, rebelling just like everybody else does by not, giving a fuck and just doing what the fuck I wanted, or starting to anyway, begin to kind of rebel against the opinion of others and make sure that people's opinions of me was not guiding my decisions in life. And so it just kind of creeped in at that age, and it really kind of meshed by the time I was in my late 20s, early 30s. So the point is that, when I was in that mind space, I think that it was very limiting, and it made me afraid. And I think it does most people as well. And I had to realize, because whenever I would have breakups with people, whether I was breaking up with them or they were breaking up with me, most of the time it was them breaking up with me. I usually was the dumpy, not the dumper, because I hang on to things way longer than I should, because I really don't like to give up. I don't like to fail, first of all. And secondly, I believe in love, and I try so hard to make it work no matter what. So I was usually the one that got dumped, not the one who dumped. So I had a hard time remembering and learning once that happened. I would get to the point I'd just spiral out of control into a deep depression. And one time when I was 19, I almost tried to kill myself, which I've talked about that story before. But I was stopped because of a phone call from the person I was killing myself over just at that exact second. It was bizarre. That's why I think there's something else out there besides us. Anyway, so I began to, or at that time in my life, I just sort of, every time it would happen, I would just die inside, and I would lose myself, and I would just, I wasn't able to function. I wasn't able to, which is normal to an extent. Obviously, you're depressed, you're sad, you're heartbroken. That's normal. But, and people would say life goes on, you're going to be fine, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that falls on deaf ears when you feel that way. And of course, they're right. Eventually it does. But you begin to wallow so much in your own self-doubt and when you're in that space, especially when you've been dumped, your ego and your self-worth are already in the shitter. So, it's hard, of course, to overcome that by actually trying really hard to believe the things people are saying, that you're this, you're that, you're great this way, you're great that way, you're attractive, or you're smart, or whatever it is you think about yourself. And remember that it isn't the end of the fucking world. And so as I aged, I began to realize, of course, that was true. And I think by the time like I said, my late 20s, early 30s, I just got to the point where, so it doesn't work out, I move on. It's not the end of the world. And my entire life didn't depend upon another person. And being happy, my happiness didn't depend upon someone else. And so I think if you remember that when you're down, you're blue, and you're depressed or whatever, or if you're afraid to leave a relationship, or you're afraid to leave a situation you're in, or your family, or whatever the case may be, your job, you're scared, you have to remember that life goes on and things will be fine, and everybody will be, everybody else's life is going to move on with or without you. And you have to remember that you have to be the master of your own fate. And in order to do that, you have to not be afraid, because if you're afraid, then you're not really the master of your own fate, because you're being controlled by fear. That's how I see it anyway. And so I think that it is an important lesson for people to learn. I think most people don't learn until they're older, and as I was, I think, like I said, late 20s, early 30s. But I think there's some people out there who don't really believe you when you tell them. That's the funny thing about being like younger or older, is when you're younger, older people are telling you all this stuff, and you're like, okay, whatever. Or if you do listen to their advice, you don't really heed it, because you even though you may believe what they're telling you, you have to go through it yourself in order to really know what they mean or really to believe what they're saying. And that kind of sucks because the truth is, if you listen to older people, elders or whatever, and they're telling you they've got sort of the rule book to life because they've lived so much more of it than you have if you're like in your teen years or early 20s or whatever. And they're telling you this is the way the world works. I know because I've lived it and lived it and lived it and lived it. And you're like, okay, great, whatever. And then you realize that they're right, that you could have been saved so much heartache, right? But the reality is, like I said, if you don't experience it yourself, that's how I am, then you'll never really know for sure. So that's the way you really learn a lesson in life, and that's the way I've learned lessons, unfortunately, is the hard way every fucking time. And I think it's been incredibly enlightening that I have, just life in general as I've gotten older. And it's just so much better being older than it was being young. Oh, my God. I hated being a young person. One, because you have no control really over anything. Because two, most people are broke and you have no money. Three, you don't have a career or necessarily an identity of your own. You're still trying to form one, outside of your parents and family. And so it just sucked. And I really, really longed so much to kind of express myself outside of my family unit and outside of who I was defined by others as being. Instead, in sort of proving that through my life choices. Excuse me, but that doesn't really come until of course, you've, lived life. And so that's why I think most people, especially me, as you get older, in your 40s and older, I think you really do begin to be happier to some degree. Even if your life sucks in general, I think with yourself to some degree, I think you're much happier than you were in your 20s. I think most 20-year-olds are truly miserable. I think, you have fun, you go out drinking and partying and doing whatever you do, having lots of sex, whatever it is when you're in your 20s. People are different, of course, but, in your 20s, you can do all these things and you have fun in that way. And the things that really matter in life in the long term, the things that really, really are important, I think that you don't really get that stuff until you're older and you've lived life. And so I think that's why people who, as we age, are happier. And I was watching Bill Maher from a few weeks ago, last night, because I missed the last few weeks of the show. And they were talking on the panel, and they're all like 60-plus-year-old people on the panel. And it was like Tim Gunn from Project One Way and not Fran Lebowitz, I can't remember her last name, Fran something, and Salman Rushdie, and of course Bill Maher. And they were talking about how much happier they are in their 60s than they ever were in their 20s or 30s. And I think that that's true. So then I think that's why. So anyway, that's my little lesson for this week. Well, you take what you will from it, but that's what I wanted to say about that. So anyway, moving on, though, I wanted to talk about some of the topics going on in the country this week. And one of those is, of course, the Me Too movement. If you haven't heard about this, of course, last week on the Gay XYZ show, if you listen to that show, which you can find at gayxyz.com, by the way, or Spreaker.com, we talked about Harvey Weinstein and how he's been shunned by Hollywood, and basically his entire career has been ruined because of his own actions. And people are claiming he sexually harassed them, and a couple of women have said that he's actually raped them. And I think it's an important movement because there are people, the Me Too movement basically is saying that it's happened to me too. And these people are saying, that they've been harassed sexually or raped in some way. And all of these women and men came out on Facebook and on social media in general with the hashtag Me Too, and that's what it means. And it's amazing how many people have been a victim of it and victimized by sexual assault in one way or the other, or rape. And I find it to be incredibly sad and disturbing because, unfortunately, this is an epidemic in America. And, I think one of the main reasons that it's almost acceptable is, there's a long-term history in America of misogyny and against women in general, and also homophobia. And I think the combination of those, or people, men specifically, who have both of those issues, are look at gay men as less than, or look at women as less than they are, and they find it easy to just try to go for what they want because they're narcissists or whatever. And because of Donald Trump making it okay, our own fucking, Harvey Weinstein is on the line for this harassment, and he's lost his company because he's no longer CEO. I mean, he has lots of money still, but he's lost his company. He's lost respect and adulation and in the industry, and he may be facing criminal charges as well for the rapes. Whereas our president of the United States, whom has admittedly done these things himself, not rape, but has admittedly, grabbed women by the pussy when they didn't ask for it, or sexually harassed or assaulted women in general, and laughs about it and finds it to be perfectly normal and acceptable behavior for him, is not held to the same standard. And, it's the hypocrisy of our country. And of course, I think people like me obviously would love to see Trump, taken down for that, but it's not going to happen with Congress the way it is, and with everybody who supports him not giving a fuck whether he actually grabs somebody by the pussy or not. I think even if he rapes somebody, and it's like he himself said, he was absolutely right. Donald Trump was right about this. When he was I think he was in the primaries or whatever, he's saying, I could fucking murder. He said I could murder somebody in the street and I would still get votes or whatever he said. And he's right, because people are so fucking stupid. They still vote for him, even though he represents everything that they are against in many ways. If he were a black male or a woman or anybody besides a white wealthy man who's filed bankruptcy like 7 times, I think that I know that it would be a completely different situation, and he would not be president anymore. He would be impeached, and maybe he will be impeached. We're still waiting for the Mueller report and everything else, and we'll see, and hopefully he is. But the point of this is that even the fucking president, if the fucking president of the United States is not going to be somebody who is held accountable for behavior like this, that's saying that he's above the law, or like he's, a despot or something. He's like not like even bigger than a king or whatever. He's just like a dictator, and can do what the fuck he wants. Because anybody else that happens to, is going to be taken to, or who does this is going to be taken to jail. Yet he gets away with it because he's wealthy and white, and a male. So I find it to be abhorrent, and unfortunately, it's continuing to go on. I personally have never, that I can recall, been sexually harassed per se. I mean, I've been hit on by guys I didn't like or wasn't interested in. And I mean, I've had a couple guys put their dicks against me and things like that. And so I guess in that way I was sexually harassed or whatever. But I mean, I was like, whatever, I just like, get the fuck off me or whatever, and that was it. But I are away from me. But so I guess technically that's sexual harassment or sexual assault, technically. But I mean, people who really, in my opinion, have been sexually assaulted are people who've been raped, obviously, or people who have been truly, been in situations of someone with power that is taking advantage of that situation in order to get sexual favors or sexual attention, or just to control them in some way. And that's what sexual, harassment and assault really is about, especially in Harvey Weinstein's case or Donald Trump's case. It's about power and control. And so I think if you've been the victim of that, I think that it's amazing if you feel comfortable enough to actually come out and tell people that you too have been a victim of it. I don't think I know that it helps people who have been a victim of this themselves to know. It's just like anything else in this world. If you know you're not alone and there's visibility to a specific issue, then that will, in effect, help people cope with what they're going through. And so maybe you can even change the mind of someone who does this themselves. I mean, a lot of times people who do this, like I said, sometimes they're mentally ill, sometimes they have like complete personality disorder or something, and sometimes they're just fucking assholes. So, or they've been raised a certain way to believe that this behavior is okay, or this behavior may be acceptable in their community, and it may be fine. And that's the problem, is that people don't stand up to it and don't say, no, this is not okay. And so now that these people in Hollywood are actually standing up and actually saying something about it, or actually doing something about it, then that should change things, hopefully, in the industry, the entertainment industry, and also across America. However, there's a lot of talk about, these people, I'm not saying these people specifically, but Meryl Streep and Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, and all those huge stars or whatever that came out about it, or against it, were saying they didn't know, and people were saying, well, they had to have known, and like Rose McGowan saying they had to have known, and So I don't know what the truth is, but regardless of whether they knew or not, I think, first of all, if they did know, they should have said something about it. If it happened to them specifically, even though I know it's a scary proposition and it's not easy to say, it's easy for me to sit here and say that, I think they should have said something if they could have. Whereas if people say nothing, nothing changes. So anyway, that's what that is. Anyway, and then speaking of all this nonsense, there was a guy in, it was a university, Cleveland State University. The president of the university defended the posters on the campus that were posted that said, "Follow your fellow faggots." 34% of trans people attempt suicide. 30% of suicides are LGBT related. Over 40% of bisexual people considered suicide. Fascist solutions. And Cleveland State University's president has defended them, saying that it's free speech. They went up at the university's main classroom building this week on the same day that they instituted an LGBT center. And apparently this group called Fascist Solutions are the ones behind it. And they are saying that, like I said, 34% of trans people try to commit suicide or do attempt suicide. And they're saying they're hateful posters because there's somebody hanging from the word faggots and telling people to follow suit, basically. And of course, I agree, that's a horrendous thing. But the university is saying it's free speech. Now, I've talked about free speech before many, many times, and I do distinguish a difference between hate speech and free speech. And this is the thing: the KKK can go out there and say and protest. They can go out and protest, and they can go out and say we hate. Well, we're white. We want white America or whatever. They can say that kind of crap like that, whatever they want, and that's still free speech. But if the KKK goes out and says, fuck you nigger, or fuck you spick, or whatever, or I'm going to fucking kill you, or whatever, I think that's hate speech completely, and I think that's completely unacceptable. So I think there should be a distinguishable difference, and there is. Technically, I read an article that stated that the Constitution protects free speech to a degree, of course, but it also does not protect incendiary speech. So incendiary speech would be, like I just said about the KKK, saying nigger, 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 whatever, to a crowd of black people or something. And so that this kind of poster, in my opinion, is also incendiary, and I do not believe it should be considered covered under the freedom of speech and the Constitution, because it is incendiary speech, because it's basically telling gay people to go out, gays and trans and whatever, LGBT people, to go out and hang themselves. And that is hate speech. And so therefore, to me, and that's how I logically, in my mind, process the distinguishable differences between free speech and hate speech, and why hate speech is not protected legally. So I don't know legally. I mean, I know, like I told you, what it said about incendiary speech. So I don't really know what the actual legalities of it are, but I do not find it to be free speech. I think it's fucking disgusting. And then speaking of this, this is one of the reasons this kind of stuff happens. This is a really sad story. There was a 15-year-old boy named Raymond Buys who was starved and tortured and forced to eat his own feces. He was found severely malnourished, dehydrated, with burns and wounds all over his body, and he laid in intensive care for 4 weeks until he died. And just 10 weeks before that, his parents signed him his parents signed him up in 2011 for the Echo Wild Game Rangers course in South Africa in perfect health, with the intention of making him a man, quote unquote. And so he was effeminate. He was considered effeminate and probably gay. No one really knows if he was or not, but he was considered to be gay by most people. And he was, of course, bullied because of it. And anyway, they put him in this place where they tied him to a chair naked with his head covered in a pillowcase, and would beat him with planks and hose pipes and would electrocute him with a stun gun. I mean, this is a 15-year-old kid, because this is to make him a quote unquote, make him a man. And this is what conversion therapy is. And people like Donald Trump and Mike Pence, they're horrible people. And they have perpetuated this kind of belief system that gays are less than and somehow wrong or whatever. And because of that, they have continually, basically embolden these bigots to do this kind of thing. So this is happening every day in America and around the world. And people don't give a fuck that no one does anything about it, or we talk about it, but no one does anything about it. Not no one. There are groups that do work and are working hard to try to make this go away. But as long as we have people like Donald Trump and Mike Pence at the helm of the free world, and they are our example of what is and isn't acceptable in life, because that's where we generally get our morality to some degree, not all of it, unless you're, of course, from religious nutbag. Like that, of course they are. Well, not Trump, but Pence. That morality kind of filters down from the top down is what I'm trying to say. And it makes all of this kind of bullshit basically rote and typical, and it's sad. What else did I want to talk about? Oh, there was also, on Will and Grace tonight, they had Jack, and this is interesting because Jack's, I don't know if you've seen the show or not yet. If you haven't, you can just get past this part. But Jack meets his grandson, and if you recall, Elliot, it was his son. He had, through artificial insemination, he donated sperm to a sperm bank, and his sperm was selected by this woman, and she had a kid. And anyway, he had this kid named Elliot. He was on the older show as well. Anyway, in the new version of the show, the new season, his son comes, and apparently Jack has been estranged from Elliot all these years because Elliot got married to some bigoted Texan woman, right-wing conservative Republican woman, and they did not invite him to their wedding, and so he hasn't talked to him in 10 years. So fast forward to now, and 10 years later, this kid comes to this door, and it's his grandson, and his grandson turns out to be gay. And his parents are sending him to a reparative therapy center and to get fixed. And so this is the problem, and I have such an issue with this because, I find it so sad that people would do this to their own child and make them feel like they're less than just because they're different. And to me, a true parent, a real parent, loves your child unconditionally. And unfortunately, that's what I've had from my mother. Not so much from my father, but from my mother. And there's nothing more valuable in the world than unconditional love. And there's nothing more devastating for a child when you don't get that from a parent. When a parent shuns you or says you're less than or not good enough for them because you're not what they expect you or want you to be. And so hopefully things will change with this, but we'll see. There's this video, I have to pray, it's like 2 minutes long, or 1 minute long. It's 1 minute long. And you may have seen it on Facebook, but it so succinctly tells why it's the people who voted for Trump and why it's such bullshit. I was saying this basically to my family and my friends, and before he was elected, I was so pissed off, and I was like, how can you even vote for someone like that? Anyway, this is what this woman says, and it's dead on. Listen.
For a candidate endorsed by the KKK.
Yes.
For the rest of your life, you have to know that you voted the same way as the KKK. No ifs, ands, or buts. No doubt about it. Which I told him.
Were you?
She was chiming in and agreeing because there's no way around it.
No,
You
yeah.
voted for hatred. You voted against women, against the gay community, against Mexicans, against blacks.
Yeah.
And you're going to call yourself a
She's
Christian?
from Mexico.
I don't give a fuck if you go to church 23 out of 24 hours. You're a mean motherfucker.
Right.
And I hope that they come after you someday when you're not expecting it. Like this motherfucker tried to do to me.
I can't.
You
So anyway, I love this woman. I think she's Jewish. I'm not sure, but she sounds like it. But she's fucking awesome. I love her. And so she said what I always had thought and felt about fucking Trump. And and as I said before, I've lost family members over this, and I've lost friends and things like that because of it. And I've cut myself out of their lives and vice versa, whatever. And it's sad because you can't have a real conversation with someone who supports him or his Reich, as I call it. So I call it the Fourth Reich. So I think it's sad that this has divided the country as much as it has, but there's a reason, because we're dealing with things that are not just about ideology. We're dealing with things that is about more about, morality. This is a moral question. It's not about just, whether he's a Republican or he's a Democrat. It's not about what he's going to necessarily do for the for the economy, even, in which he's not going to do shit. But anyway, it's about people's civil liberties, people's civil rights, people's well-being, people's livelihoods, people's lives, even. And so I tried so hard to sort of like, drill that into people's heads so they understood what the hell I was trying to get at. But no one seems to understand, if they are voting for Trump, they don't give a fuck. That's the problem, and that's the distinction, is that they don't care if it hurts somebody else. They don't care. I mean, I've literally heard people say they didn't care. If it hurts somebody else, they only care about what they get out of it. And all they care about getting out of it is keeping the country like it's 1958 and, women in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant, and men going to work, and and a lot of heterosexuals and no homosexuals anywhere are seen or visible. And if they are, they can have horrible, miserable lives in the closet, and the black people are in their right place. They don't get to sit at the lunch counter with the rest of us. And, women are in their right place, and so on. So it isn't exactly rocket science to figure out what the fuck these people really want, and why they are not seeming to care when things are going the way they are. Because as long as things calls out, as long as his administration calls out the right people, which in their mind, of course, is people like LGBT people, blacks, Mexicans, Jews, Muslims, whatever, women in some cases, they don't give a fuck how it happens. And that's unfortunately the reality we're living with today. So anyway, that's all I had to say on my show tonight. I didn't really have much to say. I just wanted to talk about those things because I wanted to do a show, because we didn't do a show tonight, so I wanted to do one real quick and say something. So, by the way, if you want to find out more about me, you can go to offlimitshow.com. You can also go to donovanlord.net, and it's DONOVANLORD.net. You can also go to Spreaker.com to find Off Limits Show there. You can go to, of course, offlimitshow.com. Also, of course, follow me on gayxyz.com, where Jason and I usually do a show every week, every Thursday. And we'll be back next week with a show for that. And you can also, if you want, follow me on Facebook and on Twitter, and also Instagram. So I'm in all those places. You can look me up in all those places, so feel free. So thanks for listening to the show, and I'll do another Off Limits show in the future, I'm sure. I don't know when, but thanks for listening, and I hope to hear you on the Gay XYZ show next week. If not, thanks, and I'll see you soon. Good night.